So I was thinking of this adage. I don't know where it's from, but the way it goes something like when you have a toothache, when someone has a toothache, all they're concerned about is their toothache, and they have no concern for the countless people starving in China or starving in Africa or something like that, right? All of China could be starving, but if you have a toothache, that's all you're thinking about. Maybe that was C.S. Lewis. I don't remember. But I'm realizing that that's a lot of what we're going through as guys right now. And yeah, I'm just starting to realize that a little bit. When you've got all these world problems, and then you've got these shootings that have been going on recently, and you've got, I don't know, just go down the list: mass shootings, sex trafficking, starvation, genocide, in other countries. Um, just go down the list, right? Or anytime you hear like a story on the news. But the thing is, when you hear those things, if your world, if your world and your current situation is already miserable, then it's hard to have a lot of sympathy in that situation, right? If you're in imminent pain, like at the moment, like the toothache, then it doesn't help, or you don't care that there's other people going through worse things, or just other people going through things. And I think, yeah, with what we're going through as young guys, I think we're starting to care less and less about regular world problems and the current events and problems in the world. They say them on the news, or you hear people talking about them. Like, did you hear about this and that? Oh no, how horrible! And a lot of young guys right now are frustrated with the dating world. They're frustrated with work. They can't buy a house. I think home ownership now, it's like the average ages of buying your first home is like 40 or something. It's something insane. I heard from a friend. So they're not able to buy houses. They're either not able to get a job, or they have a job they can't sustain themselves on. Just working really hard, and they can't get married or find a wife. The I think it's 63 or 64% of all guys under the age of 30, or between 20 and 30, are single. So they're going through all this stuff, right? And then in a lot of cases, they're leaving the church, and the church has kind of turned its back on young men. And they're going through all this, largely, you know, largely without their parents or grandparents knowing anything about it. And they just don't care, or they don't care as much about those things. That's their toothache. They've got 1,000 toothaches. And even just some of the most basic things like love, intimacy, work, and freedom and stuff like that, and even just their roles as guys are being destroyed, right? And a lot of the culture hates them, young men, white guys, guys in general. Not only it doesn't lift them up to the position that God had for them in creation to begin with, right? To have dominion over creation and over the animals, to be over the woman and for the woman to be the helper. Not only they don't have that position, but they're also torn down even from their, you know, low position. They're even torn down there. It's like kicking a man when he's down. And I don't think they care anymore about some of these other issues in the news and whatnot. I don't think they're listening. They're not passionate about it because they themselves are drowning. And A lot of people are just watching it happen and not doing anything about it. And it's actually due to their own culture, um, certain people in their life, their parents' generation, their grandparents' generation. A lot of it's due to them, the people who are actually in power, and they just don't care anymore. And I think they also don't respect their elders as much as, you know, they used to. I think there's this, and it's like not even in a bad way. Don't respect their elders, but they don't look at them in the same way. They don't look at them as, I growing up, I used to kind of have that mindset that was kind of instilled in me that the parents are always right. Respect your elders, and even growing up, they would make fun of our generation and little things we did, style choices, and the music we would listen to. Um, some good coffee. It's like probably my sixth mug today. But yeah, and I used to kind of be on board that. I was like, oh yeah, my generation sucks. Um, we're not as wise, we're not as Christian, we're not as, manly as, the other generations. But the more I look into it and the more, life just happens to me, I start to realize what I'm dealing with and what a lot of us are dealing with, we are inherited problems. They're inherited problems that we got, that we didn't vote on, that we had no choice in, that we would not have made, made those choices that our parents made and our grandparents made in the way they voted and what they promoted and how they talked, what they chose not to talk about, right? We realized, wow, we would have done it entirely different. And now we've got all these problems. We're dealing with, um, a culture that we inherited from our, our, our parents and our grandparents. We're dating the girls that our parents raised, right? And our parents' generation raised. And then you can even go so far as to talk about like immigration issues and how we spend our money, right? We had no say in that. And, we're starting to push back on that. You can see a lot of young people, getting involved in politics, and they're very firm, and they're kind of, wanting to tear down the establishment. And I'm not saying that's the way to go, but in some ways they're really voicing these new opinions and whatnot. But I think we realize that our parents, they didn't do that. They didn't stand up for, themselves, and in part, they didn't stand up for themselves or their, kids, right, or the people that come after them. They kind of were just laid back, and they kind of didn't seem to do that. And I think there's a frustration there, you know. There's a frustration there, or like even in the church, we start to realize, okay, so these churches are ran and operated not by us young 20 somethings, but it's the older generation. And so when the church, right, is neglecting young men and their problems, and I'd say young people in general, it's it we call it the church, but it's an institution, and it's ran largely by our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, right? That's who it's ran by, and those are the people in it. And we just start to realize they don't care as much for us as we thought they did, right? Or at least they care for us, but not enough to do anything. At least not enough to do anything, years ago when they saw this happening, right? Because me as a young person and a lot of my friends, as young guys, we haven't, we've been going in the church to the church for a while, and we've been talking about the things we see going wrong in the church that we've seen for a while, right? And we're young, okay? But we read the Bible, we see it's not right, the way things are going, so we talk about it. And then oftentimes, and I can think of a few instances where me or a friend has talked to someone in leadership at the church about this. Just, hey, what are your thoughts on this verse, etc. And usually getting negative responses. Usually getting like a, oh, doesn't matter, this is just how it is kind of deal. But yeah, we're young and we see it now, right? So why weren't our parents doing that? Why weren't our fathers doing that when they were in their 20s and 30s and 40s before they had us, or while we were young, I suppose, why weren't they stepping into the church and saying, hey, I see that we're taking this in a way that's not really, I don't think is very biblical. Can we talk about this, right? Why was that generation, why weren't they doing that? I don't know. I don't know why they weren't doing it. I don't know if they lacked courage. I don't know if they were lazy. I don't think they were ignorant. I know they weren't ignorant because I've talked to them about it. They have the Bible. They have no excuse and they can read it, right? So, but yeah, I think young guys are starting to check out a little bit. They're starting to care a little bit less because they themselves are going through a lot, and they can't be guilted anymore. I don't think. I think they don't respect these other generations, the older generations, and they can't be guilted anymore. They don't respect them. They realize that in some sense they've wronged us by allowing things to get to where they are, right? And it's not that everything is their fault, but some of it is stuff I've talked about. And I think they've just lost respect. I've even noticed with my friends, the way, you know, they're starting to wake up to this. I'm kind of wondering, like, how did my parents, how did my dad, not see this, not address this? If he couldn't change it, why didn't he speak into my life and say, hey, this is something you're going to deal with, you know, and I know it's bad, but I want to prepare you for it. The way the church is kind of, not going to fill in those gaps. Why didn't our parents, why didn't our dads fill in those gaps? So, and I don't know totally why, but I know that guys, they just are waking up to it, and they've lost respect for their parents, for their elders, and in some case, rightfully so. And they just don't care anymore, right? Kind of a depressing note, but well, and you think too, it's like, I don't think even another way to look at it, right, is patriotism is it seems to be at an all-time low, and for good reason, for very good reason, right? Because you look at the country and you look at the state of, like, who's the one that are who are the people that are going to be fighting the wars, right? If we get into another war, who are the people that fought our revolutionary war? Who and freed us from England? Who freed us from who fought in the civil wars, right? Who fought in World War One and World War Two? It was guys like me. It was guys in their really late teens or early 20s. Typically, that was the majority of them. You know, in their 20s, and they had something to fight for. They had something to die for. In some instances, they had a family, and they had a wife, and they had kids, right? Back home. And that was something to fight for and even to die for, to protect the country that your family lives in, right? They had the possibility of getting a job, right? Um, Getting a job and getting a house with that job. The American dream that we were told. And I think largely, the American dream, it seems to be dying. And, you know, us young guys on, the backs of which these wars were fought and this country was founded on, right? I think, that dream was stolen from us, right? Everything points to the family structure falling apart and the potential for, getting in a healthy relationship and having kids at a fairly young age. That's plummeted. All the statistics show birth rates are dropping. Birth rates aren't even at a sustainable rate at this moment. So we're quite literally going into extinction in some sense. But, guys, they don't, a lot of them don't, even the guys that used to die or die back in those wars, even if they didn't have those families and they were younger, right? They knew that they were fighting for the potential to, right? Like, I want to raise my family in this land. I'm going to fight for this land. But now it's like, man, we can't even get families started, right? Because of everything going on. And, what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? Because this country, this dream that we were sold, it's not what it seems to be. And it's not what we hoped for. It's not what we were told. They painted the grass green. And I just don't think, I think that'll kill patriotism, right? When you're like, well, I don't have a family to fight for. I don't have kids to fight for, this country, I'm trying to have kids. I'm trying to get a wife and it's not working out. So why am I so concerned about dying for my country? Why would I be concerned about that, right? Especially when you look at politics and the way it is and you see there's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of lobbying going on. No matter what you think about like the Israel stuff and the Jewish thing, Jewish problem and all that. No matter what your thoughts are on that, you just see in a lot of ways America is not America first, and our politicians aren't America first. They're not looking out for us young guys, right? And I think we're fed up with it. I think we aren't as proud as we, maybe previous generations were to be Americans. We're not as patriotic as we used to be. And it's, there's good reasons for it, right? You know? And then I've even heard it talked about, like, in regards to women, chivalry is dead and women killed it. And I think that might be an oversimplification of what's going on, right? Because there's a lot that led to that, women being the way they are. Not all, but, you know, those expectations and whatnot. There's a lot that has led up to that. But there's truth to that, right? A lot of these guys look at these girls that, maybe they got their little septum piercings and they got their back tattoos. They got, I don't know why it's so popular, but getting like a snake on your back. I see girls in the gym with that all the time. Just drinking and partying or just behaving like sluts. They got like 20 bodies by the time they're 19. I just think guys are no longer, why would they want to be acting chivalrous when the women aren't acting like ladies? Why would they want to be gentlemen when the ladies aren't acting like ladies anymore? I think they've lost some of that romanticism, at least I know I have, and I know a lot of guys that have. And it's not through online influencers or listening to, the biggest names right now that are talking negatively. It's through real life. It's through living. It's through dating. It's through, experience. And a lot of that is dead. A lot of the patriotism is dead. A lot of the respect for our elders is gone for good reason, because they did a lot of not respectable things, or they didn't, kind of stand up when they could have for us. And then a lot of the women are not ladylike or even worth pursuing, just to be frank. And then all of that compiles, and you've got all that going on as a young guy growing up in this world, and you're not so concerned about other people's battles. You're not so concerned about going to die for your country and for, the women and children in it. And I'm not saying that's necessarily right. That mindset of checking out, and I can't say that I'm there, but I can totally see why guys are there, and there's good reason for it, you know. Or when the average house costs $500,000, which even with inflation is insane. It's insane. I think my parents bought their first house for 60 grand, and they bought it when I was born and worked on it. And now it's like I need minimum, $400,000 for a halfway decent home the same size. Actually, probably more, you know, and you're just not going to get that by working for the man. So, yeah, there's been a big shift, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I just find that, I run into this a lot talking with my friends, and this is what a lot of young guys are going through. I've had countless conversations about it. And it's just something that the older generation needs to wake up to. If you're, in your 40s, in your 50s, you need to wake up to it. You need to realize it. You need to realize it's real. You need to realize that it's not the same America that you grew up in. Your kids and your grandkids, they're not afforded the same opportunities, and they're not in the same situation that you were. And every generation has its own problems. I think in a lot of ways, the ones we're dealing with now are they're unprecedented in terms of they have to do with family life, with financial, your financial life, your work life, the political world. They just seem to be just really big. They can be really depressing, because they get to your spirit, right? It's one thing to be in a time of war, but a time of war where you have to go fight for your country, right? And life has to be on pause. But you have something worth fighting for. Now you're dealing with a group of young guys that in a lot of ways don't have anything worth fighting for. And in another sense, on the other side of the coin, they've got nothing to lose. So I don't know how it's going to play out. It's very interesting. It's very depressing, very sad. But it's true. It's real. It's happening now. So I do have a verse that I just read um, in Ecclesiastes again, which is typically, pretty depressing book, but there's a lot of wisdom in it. Just as you cannot understand the path of the wind or the mystery of a tiny baby growing in its mother's womb, so you cannot understand the activity of God who does all things. Plant your seed in the morning and keep busy all afternoon, for you do not know if profit will come from one activity or another, or maybe both. So in some ways, we got to realize as guys that God's still active. He's still working. He's still working through the hell on earth that we're dealing with, right? As guys right now, as young guys. And there's a mystery to it. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know why things are the way they are. And it gets really frustrating, It gets very frustrating, and it can make you feel alone. But I think these words are still true. God is still alive, the God of the Bible, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and He's still active, even though we can't understand Him, right? So it's not time to completely check out. Not yet. Plant your seed in the morning and keep busy all afternoon, for you don't know if profit will come from one activity or another, or maybe both. So there's still light at the end of the tunnel, and you still reap what you sow, even when the conditions are horrible. You may not reap in proportion to what you sow. It may be the worst time to be farming and to be harvesting and to be reaping, but God's still active. Things are still happening, right? So I think we need to just keep that in mind before we check out.